I'm going to be answering 5 nature journaling questions today that were put to me by my supporters over on Patreon. The 5 questions that are going to be covered in this video are: how to sketch moving birds, how to write about nature when outside, how to keep motivated in those cold winter months, how to get started with Derwent Inktense pencils, and finally my guide to guidebooks. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with how to sketch moving birds outside. I love to draw outside, sketching real birds as they move around and writing notes about their behaviour. First thing to do is to choose a spot where you know you can get reliable birds. Bird feeders, for example, or just places where birds congregate. Some birds are easier to draw as they stay relatively still, like ducks and gulls, pigeons and crows. Songbirds can be quite difficult as they move around quite a lot. In the UK, robins are quite good as they tend to be bold and they hang around people. Today we're going to just have a little go at drawing this robin. So John Muir-Laws, he uses this technique called pat the bird, or I call it pat the bird, because the workshop that I attended, he said that a lot, and it really helps you to remember the technique. So what we're going to do, looking at this picture of the robin, is quickly put in the line that goes from the top of the head, where the beak joins the rest of the head, all the way down to the tail. So it's that top of the head. And look really carefully and just try and get that line down. So that's as if you're patting the bird from its beak all the way down its back to its tail. Then what I tend to do, which I think is the same as what John Muir-Laws suggested, is put in the general shape of the head quite lightly here. Then goes the line of the beak. And I always put in a mark for where the eye is in relation to that beak. Under the beak, round the edge of the circle, and go under the bird. So now you're patting the bird's underside. The line of the wing, and the tail, and then the position of the legs last. So that quickly we've managed to get pretty much the shape of this bird, and we've also started to use a gesture to build up little areas of the drawing. So now you might want to fill in a few little bits of detail around the beak and the position of the eye. And then if you have time, you can put in some of the markings. So that's a good way to get a really quick and simple drawing of a bird. Here's a few examples of sketching a robin outdoors. This robin was hanging around close by. And here looking at some gulls and some pigeons and a few other little birds. You see, for birds in flight, I'm only interested in just putting in the angles of the wings. Here are a few more, looking at ducks outside. So again, it's looking at along this top line and then trying to get the shape of the duck's head, because ducks have quite interesting head shapes. Now, when you've finished these sort of drawings, you might like to come back and do some more detailed drawings, as I did here. These ones are from photographs. I still use the same method to draw out the puffin in the first place. So again, going round the back of the head first, shape of head, putting in underneath. And in these cases, putting a little bit of extra tonal work, because I know that because these are from photographs, there's a little bit more time. I'm just going to do some more to show you a few examples, and I'll speed this video up so you can see. It's wonderful practice to just go through a whole album of pictures of birds and just try this technique over and over and over again. There's no substitute for lots of really good practice. Try and get it to the point that you're only spending about 10-15 seconds on each bird drawing. And when birds are moving around, it can be quite difficult to do this. But it just takes practice, and try and get that gesture. So as if you're stroking all the way along that bird, all in one continuous line if you can. And even if you have, when you're drawing outside, just a whole load of lines showing the top of the bird's head and down its body, you're going to get a lot better at recognising different shapes of birds and observing the differences between different types of birds by using this technique. And it's also going to help you speed up your drawing. So try it with a bird feeder, for example, in your garden, or if you don't have access easily to a lot of birds, try it using a video of birds. So find something on YouTube of some moving birds and have a go at it yourself. I'm planning to do some workshops and some further courses and tutorials on sketching birds, so look out for those in future. You can also find some really great resources on John Muir Law's website for bird drawing. There we go. Now I'm going to tackle writing about nature, how to write about what's around me when I'm sat outside. And there's a few ways to tackle this. I think that writing while you're actually out in nature can be really fulfilling and a quite meditative and relaxing experience. But it's not always so relaxing if you don't know what to write about and you're getting stressed out trying to think about where to start. So there's a few ways to tackle this problem if you're kind of feeling a bit of writer's block. The first way is to just don't take the notebook with you. So to start off with, go for a walk and really just go and enjoy that moment itself for its own sake, without putting the pressure on that you feel that you need to be writing about it right there and then. And then when you come back, as soon as you get back into your house, put everything down and grab your nature journal. And this is the time to really write down everything that you can remember from your trip. Now, I quite often do use this technique. I don't always write in the present tense when I'm out in nature. I do sometimes come back and then write about it. Sometimes I see something when I don't have my journal with me. This technique is quite useful for us because we quite often find it a bit more natural and easy to write in the past tense. I went to, I saw, I felt, this sort of way, in a more kind of traditional journal kind of style. It's worth a try. This might work out better for you. I did this when I first started nature journaling in 2016, but now I really do think that it's better to experience nature straight away and get those notes down as soon as possible. It's kind of difficult sometimes to formulate sentences or try to formulate detailed or flowery prose when you're sitting outside. So I recommend that you just start with a list. Well, in this video in November 2022, I put together a technique that you can use to start making lists while nature journaling. And I'll link that video in the description below. The technique basically is that you're going to choose a position and you'll either stand or sit, whatever's comfortable for you, but remain in that one place for at least 5 minutes, preferably 10-15 minutes. During that time, you will write down everything you notice as a list and not worry at all about trying to string those words together. So what you do is you may decide to do it by senses. You may write down a few things that you hear or that you see, or you might just keep a running total of everything that you possibly can think of. After you've done one thing, after you've put down something, so say you see a bird in a tree, you write down the bird. If you know what it is, you'll write down what it is. Otherwise, you'll write a few descriptions of it. What colour is it? What does it remind you of? That sort of thing. After you've done one thing, then look immediately for something else. This comes back to a technique I quite like called What Else Is Here? This is one of my favourite techniques. You write down one thing, find one thing, note it down. What else is here? And look for something else. Before you know it, you're in this journey of observing and you're writing lists of practically everything that you can see around you. Try this a few times. Once you've done that, say, on several nature journaling trips and you feel ready to start stringing, sentences together, you can go on to the next step, which is to start off with that list and then start thinking about some adjectives and some things that will help you to describe what you're seeing. And from there, you can then go on to start forming longer sentences and stringing a few ideas together. Now, I'm going to be talking more about how to write in your nature journal in my upcoming online course. And that video will be landing on my Patreon first. And then it will be in the How to Start a Nature Journal course, which will be also available on my website. Next, I'm going to be talking about how to keep yourself motivated nature journaling when the weather isn't so good, or in winter. Now in winter it's one of the best times to be getting out, especially if you have seasonal affective disorder or any other ways in which the bad weather or winter conditions influence your mood and your mental health. Getting out for 10-15 minutes every day can really help get you just that little dose of vitamin D from the sun, and it's certainly just a little moment of head clearing has really helped me. Now in terms of nature journaling, it's not always easy to actually take the kit with you. I always like to keep things simple, pencil and paper. Pencil and paper is great for bad conditions because water won't affect the marks too much that you make with a pencil. If the conditions are really too bad, then I would just leave the nature journal at home and go for a noticing walk instead. A good 10-15 minutes, walking outside, keeping a mental list of all of the things that you see, maybe taking a few photos with your phone, if you want to sketch from them later or as an aid to memory. And then when you get in, try to clear 5 minutes just to write down everything you can remember into your journal. And if you have a little bit longer, maybe do a few sketches from the photographs that you took. So I don't think you need any specialist equipment. I don't think you need waterproof pads or pencils or pens, unless perhaps you are journaling in a rainforest or you're going to go out on a boat or something like this. Otherwise, just a little bit of planning should see you right. In terms of equipment for keeping yourself warm and dry, that's really down to your own discretion. I like to just have a hat and scarf and a really decent waterproof. Personally, I don't like waterproof trousers and I'd rather just let myself dry out. And just plan everything, plan your walks well. Try to go around the weather as much as you can. If you need to miss a day or if things just aren't working out for weather-wise when you really wanted to journal, there's no harm in just doing a bit of nature journaling from your home, looking out into your garden or using photographs from an earlier trip. Hopefully that's useful, and I do really encourage everybody to try and get out, especially in winter, for a good 10-15 minutes every day. Do a little nature noticing walk if the weather's not good enough for journaling. Derwent Inktense is my favourite water-based medium. I make absolutely no secret of the fact that I love Derwent Inktense, particularly when they're in the pencil form. Now, I've experimented with other water-based media like gouache and watercolour and botanical inks, which you saw on this channel quite a lot last year in 2022. I really love using the pencil forms of the Derwent Inktense, but you can also get them as studio sets, pans or blocks. I do have the pan set, which I rather like, but today I'm going to focus on the pencils. I have this lovely plant here. I'm just going to draw its leaves first. All right, there's two ways to use the Derwent Inktense pencils. You can use them dry, putting the colour on first, or you can use them wet with a paper palette. I'm going to show you both on this little drawing of this plant here. First I'm putting on the colour dry. This is Ionian green, it's my favourite green in the entire range. So in this case I'm just using it a little bit like a colour pencil, and I'm using it dry for the moment. Now the downside of the dry technique is that you really need to know what the colours look like before you've started, because they're going to look very different when they're wet to when they're dry. So that's why it's good to have a swatching chart like this for your colours, so you know what to expect when you put the water on. I highly recommend that you use a water brush with these pencils. I like these Derwent water brushes as well very much. These give them a little squeeze to release water onto the brush. You can feel it on your hand like this. And now what I tend to do is just drag some of the colour out from the pigmented area to where I've already laid it down. And that's where I'm going to get this nice light tone in here. So you can use the water in the water brush to pull around the pigment from the areas where you've laid the colour down. With Derwent Inktense, it's always best to go from your lightest colour first. So put your lightest colour down and then go darker over the top, letting it dry between layers. Derwent Inktense will dry permanent, so you can keep on layering it like a coloured pencil. In some ways it behaves more like a coloured pencil than it behaves like watercolour. Now I'm going over the areas where I put down a lot of colour. It takes a lot of practice to get this controlled with it, because I used to make quite a mess with these when I first started. But as long as you remember the rule to go from the light colour first and then the dark colour later, it should help you to try and keep it all under control. The main thing is to try and keep the brush as dry as possible. So a little bit of water, but not so much water that you can't control the pigment. Okay, so that's the dry technique. The second technique that I like to use is what I call the wet palette technique. So I'm going to put all of my colours over here. This way I get to control precisely what I'm putting onto my drawing. So back with my water brush again, I move the pigment away from the palette, water it down a little bit. So it's kind of washing out that pigment. It's giving me much more control. You see how subtle I can get this on here now. So I use this a lot for plants when I'm doing intricate pictures of plants. I will always do it this way, drawing my pencils out on a separate bit of paper, lifting the colour, mixing the colour on the paper so I can see precisely what colour I'm going to get, and then lifting it up onto my drawing. My final tip for Derwent Inktense pencils today is to never ever dip the pencil into the water. I've seen people do this, trying to use it like a paintbrush. It's going to drastically reduce the length of life of your pencil if you keep dipping it into water this way. It also doesn't make a very effective mark. I would also suggest that you don't draw directly onto a wet painting with a dry pencil. Unless there's a very specific type of mark that you're going for. You see these areas of fern in this landscape. I put these in deliberately, drawing these lines onto the wet picture. But for the most part, you want to eliminate areas of obvious line. The best way to avoid doing this is to let the paper dry between each layer of pencils. Good guidebooks are invaluable for the nature journaler. I'm going to show you some of my favourite guidebooks now. Now, these guidebooks are for the UK because I'm based in the UK, but I'm going to show you some of my favourite characteristics of these decent guidebooks so that you can find something with similar characteristics for your own region. Okay, I'm going to start with birds. These are my favourite two guidebooks for birds in the UK. These Reader's Digest books, they're quite old and they're really very beautiful inside. They're not the best guide in terms of identifying a bird, I don't think, but I really like that they've got photographs, they've got illustrations, they've got pictures of the birds at different stages of their life cycle, male and female. And the guidebook's organised really nicely into gulls, waders, other sections as well. So it's quite easy to, if you know the shape of the bird, to quickly jump into the correct kind of section for what you're looking at. Look out for these maps that show you whether they are visitors or local birds. Now, in terms of identification, I actually prefer this one. This is the OSPB Handbook for British Birds. And this one, again, it has mainly illustrations inside. But what I really like about this is it's got a lot of pictures that have the bird in flight from different angles, which can be really useful. Again, it does have the distribution map. And what I really like about it is that it's got all of these different sections for each bird. So there's an identification section to help you identify it with a really good description. The habits to help you understand kind of what its behaviours are, so you sort of can work out what it might be based on the habits, the bird that you can see. What the sound is like, the habitat, food, breeding patterns, population, and some notes about the conservation. I find this one really helpful. And also within all of these individual sections, it's also got, so all of this is small waders in flight, so it's got drawings of all of these different waders, and you can see that they're quite similar. So it's quite useful to have this guide to point out the main differences, particularly differences in size between all these different birds. I really like that for things like gulls where their plumage changes throughout the year. This one has first winter, first summer, second winter, summer, winter plumage for the same bird to really help you to identify it. I think if you can find something like that, you're going to be set for birds. I really recommend this one if you're in the UK. For fungi, this is my absolute favourite. This is the Collins Complete Guide to British Mushrooms and Toadstools. This is just fantastic as a guidebook. So it splits it all up into different groups again, different families. It has specific photographic examples of the different species that are found within each of those families. The information that it gives you is really useful as well. It's got what the cap looks like, what the gills look like, and the habitat that you can find it in. The only thing with this book is it doesn't really give you a lot of information about edibility of these mushrooms. It's not a forager's guide. But if you are a nature journaler who is attempting to identify the mushrooms that you find out and around, not particularly to go about eating them, and I really recommend this guide. And as you can see, flicking through it, it's really beautifully organised. There's a lot of really helpful identification information at the front as well. There's a glossary of terms that are used in mycology, identification notes, and some interesting facts about the fungi as well. For insects, I really recommend these Wild Guides series. These are so brilliant. They are photographic guides in the most, and a bit like for the birds, they have distribution maps, and they have all of these little tips about the identification, the behaviour, the habitat, and these phenology wheels are really useful. They show you what stage you'll find the butterfly in at any time of year, so whether it's at caterpillar, egg, chrysalis or adult stage. But what I really love about this is if you go to the back, you've got information on the caterpillar food plants of all of the butterflies that are in the book. It really help you to narrow down where you might find these butterflies and how you might attract them to your garden. Nectar sources for all of the butterflies. And my absolute favourite thing about it, there are pictures of all of the eggs of every butterfly in the UK, and the caterpillars, and the chrysalises. So it gives you all of the information that you really need to be able to find and identify these butterflies. And then here at the back, it gives you information about the legal protection status, whether or not they're on the red list, and conservation information as well for all of them. So that's for butterflies. And this one is the same series, and it's for the dragonflies this time. So this time it's the British Dragonfly Society. I think that this book is so amazing because it gives you the pattern of the abdomen on every type of dragonfly and damselfly that's found in the UK. And they can be quite difficult to identify because they're quite similar. So to have all of these keys to help you actually get between different species is really amazing. It also has the face of each dragonfly, so what they look like head on, because the shape of their faces and the colours in their eyes can also help you very much to identify them. Lots of photographs, again a distribution map, and again here it's got the little picture of the abdomen as well. If you think that you might have it, there's a lookalike section just so that you can check that your identification is correct by linking you to other parts of the book, and little bits about where to look, what they tend to be doing, what their behaviours are like, and all of these photographs, male and female, different angles. It's a fantastic series of guides. These are the other ones though. We've got hoverflies, spiders, moths, fish. I'm just gradually picking up all of these guides. So highly recommended the Wild Guides series if you're in the UK. And if you're not in the UK, anything that you can find that actually gives you all of this information about what the bodies of dragonflies look like and the full life cycle of butterflies will really help you to actually really get into identifying these. When I'm trying to identify a plant, I tend to go for the flower if possible. Otherwise, I'll go through and look up different leaf shapes. The Keble Martin book, this was produced in the 1800s and has these wonderful plates, so of similar plants, so you can sort of find the approximate look of the plant. I tend to, in here, I'll try and find the plate. So I'll scan through this book and I'll try and find the plate that's closest to what it is that I'm looking at. So say I found the forget-me-not, I'll look through this one, and then I'll use this book as a starting point to then go on to other books that will give me more information. Wildflowers of Britain Month by Month by Margaret Erskine Wilson. This is very useful because she, similarly to Keble Martin, she produced these plates of different plants, but she did it by what's around at particular times of year. So it's very helpful because if you find a flower at this time of year, you can go to this book and eliminate or reduce the pool of plants that you're looking at. So again, it's a starting point. Once I have a vague idea of what it is that I'm searching for, I tend to go to Google and then look up some photographs. There's some really good websites such as Nature Spot in the UK that can help you to take the identification a little bit further. Another starting point is this one, Wildflowers by Colour. And of course, this does exactly what you would expect. She's grouped all of these by the colour of the flower, from yellows going into reds and pinks, purples. Again, this is a starting point, and from here, if I think that I've found it, I will go off and check out some other, usually online sources to help. The Flora Britannica is an amazing book because what Richard Mabey does here is gather cultural information as well as the scientific information. So, in fact, I'd say that in this book, it's more important, this kind of cultural heritage that we have and relationship with all of the plants, which of course for nature journaling is very interesting. So he talks about that plant through history. So once I have a species name, I tend to go to this book and find out something a little bit more interesting than the sort of pure scientific information. It's really nice to go into a little bit more about how people have used and related to that plant in the past. And I think that human connection is what helps us to remember the names. I hope you got something out of those, and thank you so much to all my Patreon supporters who contributed questions for this volume. The questions post for volume 2 is up on my Patreon now, and if you're watching this later, hopefully there will still be questions posts up there for you to come and contribute to. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.